Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's go for 1500 likes on this one. Liking the video does help a ton with getting the video into the algorithm. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. So if you see yourself coming back to this channel from time to time, why not subscribe? I found out that 50%, half of my viewers, actually aren't subscribed. So anyway, before we get into the stories, I do have a quick question. I'm actually really curious to see what all of you do while listening to my videos. I've had some people comment that they listen while they're at work, or when they're driving, or when they're just playing some video games. If you don't mind, if you feel comfortable doing so, drop a comment letting me know your favorite time to listen to my content. Anyway, sit back, grab a coffee, pack a bowl, whatever it is that you do to relax, and let's get into the stories. Enjoy, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I fixedly stared at my computer screen as I carefully listened to the voice from that YouTube video like my life depended on it. I listened again and again, telling myself it couldn't be possible. Surely it was just some random guy with a voice that just so happened to be very similar to mine. Or perhaps I was just getting nervous, and my paranoia was tricking my senses into hearing something that didn't correspond with reality. I listened one final time. It was 2:30 a.m. and I desperately wanted to go to bed, but I had to make sure or else the intrigue wouldn't let me sleep anyways. Yep. Now I was convinced. No, I was positive of it. As absolutely nonsensical as it seemed, the voice from that video was none other than my own. Heinrich's Gaming Room. That was the name of that YouTube channel. Heinrich was indeed my name. In fact, I visited this channel because YouTube's algorithm recommended it to me out of nowhere, and I thought it was cool because it had my name, and had videos featuring many video games I was familiar with. I was your average 19-year-old college student still living with my parents in Germany, but I wasn't a YouTuber. I admit I had fantasized with the idea several times, especially when I was a young teenager in middle school, but I've never had the sufficient means, nor the dedication to pull it off. I had a YouTube profile that I used to subscribe to channels that interested me, and maybe leave a comment from time to time, but that was it. So where the hell had this channel come from? As far as the actual content that could be found on Heinrich's Gaming Room went, it mainly consisted of gameplays. As its name would suggest, namely they were video games from the mid-2000s to early 2010s I had grown up playing. Most of them were games made by the company Nintendo, as I had primarily owned their consoles during my childhood, as opposed to my friends who had always leaned more towards Sony's PlayStation. In regards to their quality, the videos weren't unwatchable per se, but they certainly weren't stellar either. The voiceover that accompanied the gameplays especially ticked me the wrong way. And not just because it was literally my voice, but also because they were done in broken English with a comically exaggerated German accent that almost made me think the channel was trying to be some sort of parody. I can speak English way better than that, I thought. By that point, I was exhausted, so I decided to call it a day and go to bed. The next morning I checked the mysterious channel once again, and to my surprise, a brand new video had been uploaded as recently as a couple minutes prior. It was the continuation to a gameplay series in which my doppelganger played Yoshi's Island DS, an unfairly overlooked game for the Nintendo DS, which is actually a sequel to the critically acclaimed original Yoshi's Island for the Super Nintendo. Alright everybody, we're going to continue playing Yoshi's Island DS. We're going to pick up from where we left off the other day at the start of World 2. said an all too familiar voice in its characteristic German accent. He then continued playing the game normally, making a few unremarkable comments here and there until he said something that sent shivers down my spine. Funny story, I first played this game back when I was 7 years old, and I bought it from my good friend Dieter. He actually sold it to me for €2 in the middle of the school playground. I still have the original box for the game, and it still has Dieter's name written on it. The voice said before letting out a light chuckle. My body trembled in shock as I listened to the voice in disbelief. It was true. All of it was true. I still remembered that day as if it had been yesterday. I remember how Dieter almost got caught by our teacher trying to sneak the game inside the school. I remembered how he wanted to sell it to me because his grandmother thought all video games were compatible with all consoles, and so she bought him a Nintendo DS game, even though he had a PSP. I remember Dieter's name written on the game's box. Just to make sure, I went to check the drawer in my bedroom where I kept my old toys and video games. There it was. The very same box containing the game Yoshi's Island DS. It had faded considerably with time, but it could still be seen. On the back of the box was a name written in blue marker. Dieter. One side of my brain instructed me to stop watching. It would have been the most comfortable option, but my curiosity prevailed. I needed to keep watching. I needed to know what the hell was going on and figure out who this imposter was. Before advancing to the next stage, I want to go back to World 1 because one of my subscribers commented on the previous video saying I had missed a red coin on a previous level. The imposter explained. It was then when I decided to check out the comments section to see who was watching those videos, only to find there were no comments, no views, no likes, nothing. And it's not like they were disabled or anything. I could leave a comment if I wanted to, and yet there literally were no comments. I checked his other videos and the same was true. No one was watching this. So what in the world was he talking about? Alright guys, we've reached the end of the episode, but before you leave, I want to make a special announcement. Our next gameplay will take a bit longer than usual to come out because tomorrow, I'm going to be organizing a special live stream to show my gratitude for all your support. I'm going to show my face for the first time ever, so I hope to see you all there. The voice announced before ending the video. You can bet as soon as I jumped out of bed the following day, I checked my phone to see if the livestream had begun. Not yet. The channel's most recent video was still the one from the previous day. I had subscribed to the channel. That way I would receive a notification as soon as the stream would go live. So I decided to just go about my day normally and wait until that notification arrived. My parents went shopping later that evening, leaving me home alone. It was then when my phone finally notified me. The live stream had begun. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my special live stream. The voice greeted his audience, which only consisted of myself. That's right. I was the only person watching that live stream. Judging by what could be seen on the recording, he was apparently outdoors, standing in what looked like a garden. A suspiciously familiar garden. Now, I see all your comments begging me to reveal my face, but first, I wanted to take you on a little tour and show you my house, he said before he moved his camera to focus on a house located right in front of him. My house. I frantically looked out the window trying to spot him, but the garden was empty. He wasn't there, and yet the live stream clearly showed him standing right in front of my house. I continued watching on my phone as he approached the front door of the house and entered the building. Once again, the stream clearly showed him opening the door and stepping inside a house which looked identical to mine. But I didn't see or hear anyone opening any door outside of the live stream. So yeah, welcome to my house. Here we have the kitchen, the living room. It's nothing special, but it's my home. The voice said as he walked around an exact replica of my house. I checked every room and every corner of the house in an attempt to find him, to no avail. Alright, my dear subscribers, I'm gonna head to my bedroom where I normally film my videos, and once I get there, I'll finally reveal how I look, he announced, once again speaking as if plenty of people were watching him, even though I was the only spectator. I simply stood inside my bedroom with my eyes glued to the phone, horrified. I started hearing them. Footsteps. Someone was approaching my bedroom. And here we are. Welcome to my bedroom. The voice said as he opened the bedroom's door. And this time, I saw it open too. But inexplicably, I could not see him. I could only hear his footsteps and watch as the door opened and closed seemingly on its own. Look at me. Aren't I handsome? The voice said as he filmed a terrified 19-year-old with a phone in hand staring towards the camera in horror as he screamed to the top of his lungs. The next day arrived and I got out of bed excited by the splendid reception my livestream had received. There were hundreds of comments from my subscribers congratulating me for how successful Heinrich's gaming room was becoming. Wasting no time, I quickly got to work and began recording my next gameplay video. I don't want to keep my loyal audience waiting, after all. I didn't have a normal childhood. Despite such a unique claim, the abnormality that ended up defining my childhood only occupied a small portion of it. One night to be specific. When I was 9, my life changed forever. I was living in the house that my parents still live in now. The night was like any other. That was until something drastic happened. I was just on the verge of sleep. That type of feeling where you're conscious, yet dreaming. Where your mind is filling your head with random thoughts, feelings, and images. Yet you're not quite fully asleep. In this state, it's common to have that jumping sensation. This is because your body has fallen asleep too quickly, and your brain is sending a shockwave to your muscles to ensure you haven't died. At least, that's what I've heard. Before I knew it, I awoke to a thin ray of moonlight piercing my eyes, and a gentle scraping sound. My window and blinds had opened. I immediately looked up. The moonlight that now filled my small childhood bedroom illuminated enough for me to see what was happening. A man was entering my room through the window. As he was putting his leg over the windowsill, the rest of his body still outside and unaware of what was happening inside, I quickly slammed my head into my pillow and pretended to be asleep. I laid at such an angle so that I could still see most of my room, the floor being the exception. I opened my eyes the smallest amount I possibly could, and saw something that would change me forever. A man in a gray suit wearing a gray fedora had made his way into my room through my upstairs window. How he managed to go about doing this, I'm still not sure. I saw him duck his head, his legs already over the windowsill and resting on the foot of my bed, and push his way fully into my bedroom. I shut my eyes. I was so scared I quite literally forgot how to breathe. Subtly, anyway. The only sound I could hear was the incredibly loud thumping of my heart beating in my ears. By the time I'd opened my eyes again, my window was shut along with my blinds. I had to open my eyes wider this time, so that my pupils would dilate and I'd be able to see what was happening. The blinds being shut obscured my vision, as there was now no light in my bedroom. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could now see a tall, slender silhouette of a man in the corner of my room where my door was. I had never felt so sick. You know that feeling you get when you go over a bump, or when the roller coaster goes over a hill? That was the feeling I had. I cautiously observed him as he stood in the corner of my room, his hands clasped behind his back, watching me. I could see his chest gently bouncing up and down as he breathed. I closed my eyes. At this point, I assumed it was a dream, so I shut my eyes, and with great difficulty I found myself asleep. By the time I woke up the next morning, the man was gone. I found my window to be open slightly, about an inch or so. This told me that what had happened hadn't really been a dream. A man in a gray suit wearing a fedora had found his way through my window and into my bedroom. I had many questions. Who was he? Why did he enter my room? Why did he come through my window and not the main entrance? At what point during the night did he leave? A million thoughts and possible answers flooded my brain. Over the course of the next month or so, these thoughts persisted as the man continued to visit me every night. By the second or third week, I was no longer scared. In fact, I felt an odd sense of comfort when I heard my window start to slide open, or when I saw moonlight flood my room as he opened my blinds. By the third and fourth week, I would wait and stay awake for him to arrive. I was no longer scared of letting him see that I was aware of his presence. In fact, one night, he arrived and stood in the corner of my room with his hands clasped behind his back like he always did. He gave me a slight nod as though saying, "Hey, it's me, your old friend Slender Suit Man." I'm not sure exactly how long he'd been visiting me before this fateful night. I assume it was just under a month. One night, I heard my window slide open. A hand curled under my blinds and he peeled them up, letting the usual array of moonlight flood my room. He slid in through my window, shut it behind him, and stood in the corner with his hands behind his back. Not a single thing about this routine had changed since the day I first saw him. There was one thing that kept nibbling away at me, however. I could never make out his face. The shadow of his fedora somehow shielded any light from touching his face, so, in reality, I had no idea what he looked like. Although that sense of comfort was still there, I believe that was mostly due to his consistency. If he hadn't done the exact same thing each time, I would have continued to be worried sick. In fact, I felt that there was something deep inside of me that continued to trigger my fight or flight response, even when it was his upteenth time visiting me. Then the air of the room changed. Everything became still. I laid there in silence, confused before I heard a loud bang from downstairs. Something breaking. I looked over at the man in the suit, whose hands were now by his side. It was almost scary to see him standing in any other position excluding the one where his hands were behind his back. He turned on a 180-degree axis, grabbed the door handle, twisted it, and pulled it open. He stuck his head out. He then pulled his head back in and quietly shut the door. We were there in darkness for a few seconds before we heard footsteps coming up the stairs. That was when I started freaking out. I began to scream, but before any sound could come out, the man in the suit held up one finger to his face as though advising me to be quiet. We heard footsteps approaching my door. The man in the suit swiftly walked over to my bed, helped me up, and swept me behind him. We quickly and quietly made our way towards his corner. He seemed perfectly calm. We saw the door handle twist, and the door slowly opened. A silhouette of a man appeared in our vision, and we saw a long cylindrical item in his hand. It looked as though it could have been a knife. The atmosphere tightened a second later when he spoke. "Sorry, kid. This isn't going to end well for you." He slowly raised the object in his hand. Within the span of half a second, the man in the suit drew a gun from the inside of his blazer, placed a hand over my ear, and shot the man in the doorway. By the time I was done holding my ears and staring at the ground, silently crying, I turned around to see the man in the suit was gone. My window was wide open, and the wind from the outside was making my curtains flail desperately. I looked back at my doorway and the intruder was lying on the ground with a bullet hole in his side. Then in that moment, I realized that had the man in the suit not been there, I would have been dead. I saw my mom come out of her room, look at my body, and her eyes widened. I think she saw something in the intruder's face that neither me nor the man in the suit could see. I screamed. 18 years later. "You're so immature," I said with a slight hint of venom in my voice. "How many times have I told you this story, and how many times has it ended up in a debate of some kind?" "Every time," he said with a smile on his face. God, I hated that smile, especially when it was in this context of this argument. I just find it funny how long you've been telling me this joke, and yet you still expect me to believe it. "The joke isn't in my story, it's in your name," I said with a giggle. "At least my parents didn't hate me so much they decided to name me Hercules." "Shut up," he said in response. "And your parents do hate you." "Too far, man," I said seriously. "Hercules, I'm not kidding. Please believe me. I get it sounds crazy, and I know I say this every time, but you have to believe me. Why would I make this up? Why do you think the man who broke into my house had a bullet wound?" "He shot himself?" He said as though it was the most obvious conclusion. "That's literally what the police report determined. Trauma affects people in different ways. One of the most obvious examples being memory. I think you've created this as a coping mechanism." I sighed. There was no point. Who the hell was going to believe this story? I know what I saw, and I know it was true, and yet the story that emerged sounded so fabricated. For the past 18 years, there has barely been a day that's gone by where I haven't thought about the man in the suit, the man who saved my life, and the man who I hadn't seen since that fateful night. "Tab, please." I stumbled home that night. I hated trying to tell Hercules about what happened. I really have no one else in my life. My parents and I have had a really rocky relationship ever since our house was broken into, and I don't blame them. So much legal stuff went down that I still have no idea about, and I'm sure that as many times as they want to deny it, they at least partly blame me for it. I just remember a barrage of police at my house, discussing the origins of the unknown intruder. They classified him as a John Doe, since he had no records or known family members. I opened my door and overarmed my keys and phone onto my bed. I threw myself down next to them. I laid there for a moment, thinking about the man in the suit and searching for ways in which I could possibly find him again. I fell asleep that night with the man in the suit still on my mind. I needed to see what he was up to, and why he was in my room for those several weeks. These questions flooded my brain the entire night. I woke up the next morning and conducted research throughout the entire day. For the next 2.5 weeks, I would wake up, browse the internet on information about sightings of him, news reports on the murder, and other topics of this nature. I never found anything solid. At this point, I was concerned about my mental health. I had barely left my apartment for those 2 weeks. Any calls I'd receive would ring out. Any texts I'd receive would endure an unintentionally nasty response from me. I was worried that I was becoming obsessed with the man in the suit. Hercules had ties into some lab that was downtown. A few years back, he'd had an apprenticeship there. He'd mentioned at some point that they used to specialize in hypnosis therapy. Except it was super secret and all of the information about it was under wraps. He would tell me about how people who would come in and be cured of all types of problems. It was rumored that they'd achieve things like curing pervasive mental problems, treating chronic health conditions, time travel and memory removal. The last one was the one that I was focused on. I was so sick of thinking about the man in the suit. I just wanted the memory of him, and the memory of that entire night gone. Since he worked there a few years ago, maybe I could contact him and see what he knows. I texted him, even though it was 12:30 at night. The message read, "Hey man, hope you're well. Sorry I haven't called you back. Was just wondering if you still had any info on that lab you did that apprenticeship at a few years back. Would really appreciate it. Catch you soon, man." I turned my phone off and put it on my desk. I went to sleep that night as soon as my head hit the pillow. I woke up the next morning with a headache. I got up, had a glass of water, and returned to my room to check my phone. I checked my messages. I saw a message in response from Hercules, an address. Along with it was a message that said, "I don't know what you're doing, but good luck with it. You might not be as lucky this time to have a man in a suit come and save you." He had 2 skull emojis next to it, as though it was the funniest thing ever. I entered the address into Google Maps, got dressed, and headed into my car. After an hour or so of driving, I heard the magical "You have reached your destination" chime from my phone as I pulled up in front of a large, menacing building. I turned my car off. From the inside of my car, I could see 2 entrances. One was way past me to my left, which had a rotating door. There were 2 extremely tall and muscular men with earpieces on either side of it. One entrance was nearly directly in front of me, slightly to the right, that had "staff only" on it, written in bold writing. Due to the lack of guards and the absence of the chance of me getting my ass handed to me in a fight, I chose the door to the right. I walked over to it, turned the handle, and gave it a gentle push. Like clockwork, the door swung open and I was granted access. I assumed it was unlocked for fire exit safety reasons. I found myself to be in a stairwell, which reinforced my theory on the fire safety door. As I gazed around, I found that there was 1 flight of stairs to my left that went upwards, and 1 to my right that went downwards. This meant that the downstairs to the right would take you underground. I followed the stairs down for what seemed like hours. I was walking downstairs for so long I started to feel exhausted. Eventually, however, I reached a landing and a door that said, "Warning, confidential information inside. Do not enter without a level 4 pass." I didn't know what the hell a level 4 pass meant, so I tried to kick down the door. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work. I saw a scanner next to the door, which I'd assumed scanned the level 4 passes and unlocked the door. I ran back upstairs again, which took an excruciatingly long time. I did this to find a more populated area so that I could hopefully find and use a pass. Upon finding myself back in front of the door in which I entered, I went up the flight of stairs on the left and found myself in a hallway. I opened a random door in the hallway and emerged in a large, empty office area. I searched around for passes. There were hooks on each cubicle that most people had their passes hanging on. Most of them were either level 1 or level 2. I found one that was level 3, but that still didn't help me. I searched for another 10 minutes before I finally found one. A level 4 pass. In the pocket of a gray blazer hanging on the back of a chair. I quickly ran back down the stairs, nearly tumbling down every few minutes. I nearly threw up by the time I'd reached the bottom due to the amount of exercise I was getting. I scanned the level 4 pass, and with a satisfying click, the door unlocked. I grabbed the handle, twisted it, and pulled on it. I found myself to be in a massive expanse of machinery and wiring. The room would have had to have been the size of a mid-sized stadium. I stood in the doorway speechless at the dimensions of the room. I was surrounded by complex equipment, most of which I hadn't a clue of its purpose. From the doorway, I could see something in the center that looked almost like a portable toilet. This rectangular prism had hundreds, if not thousands, of wires coming out of it at every angle. Upon closer inspection, the object was a lot more fancy than a portable toilet. In fact, it looked polished and modern, and had an area to stand in the interior that wasn't obscured by a toilet. Barely enough room for one person. I pumped my fist in the air upon realizing the magnitude of my success. After a brief observation, I found a keypad next to it which, like the door, had a scanner with a sticker on it that said Level 4 Pass Only. I scanned my pass on it. There were already settings that had been entered on the hypnosis box that had remained there since its last usage that I decided to leave as they were. After several minutes of torturous anticipation and gently winking colors coming from the interior, everything went black. I woke up laying down inside of the box. I got up shakily, using the walls of the box to help me up. I cautiously pushed open the door and looked around. Nothing was different. I was still in the same room, exiting the same box, feeling the same amount of uncertainty. I closed the door to the box behind me before processing what had just happened. I definitely still had the memory of that night, if anything. It had merely revitalized it. I skulked my way out of the room, sad and confused. How had it not worked? I made my way up the seemingly infinite staircase and out onto the landing. Next to the exit was a small newspaper stand. I grabbed today's paper, rolled it up, and made my way to my car. I sat in my car for a few minutes. The fact of the house and the night was most of what I'd thought about for the past 2 weeks. I felt an unexplainable urge to confront these memories and see if I can't get over them. I plunged my key into my car and heard my engine purr. I stepped on the gas pedal. By the time I arrived, it was nighttime. I hadn't been there in several years, since my parents and I barely talked. In fact, now that I was seeing it in person, it looked so similar to how it was back then. During my minutes reminiscing and observing my house from the exterior, I heard a sound slightly to my right, an extremely distant sound, one that I wouldn't have picked up on had it not been for the silence of the neighborhood. In an attempt to locate the source of the sound, my eyes landed on my bedroom window. What I saw next made my stomach drop through the floor. The leg of a man in gray pants had just disappeared into my old bedroom. I had instant butterflies. He was back. Just when I was visiting my old house, he was back. My parents never locked their doors. We didn't live in a quiet town by any means, just one that didn't have much crime. No one in the neighborhood locked their doors. I ran through the main entrance and into the house. As I was making my way to the stairs in my euphoria, I accidentally bumped into a flower pot. It made a loud crashing sound. I made my way up the stairs, incredibly nervous to be seeing the man in the suit again for the first time in 18 years. I stood there outside my bedroom door for a while, gathering strength and trying to fight off nerves. After several minutes, I walked up to my childhood bedroom door, twisted the handle and gently pushed the door open. In front of me was a tall, slender man in a suit with a child standing behind him. The smile dropped from my face. Instantly, it hit me. The presets on the hypnosis machine clearly didn't remove memories. It must have dilated time. Within that split second, I felt every atom of my body tense up. I felt the exact same fear that I'd felt that night 18 years ago. A million thoughts were racing through my brain, none of which I could process in time to somehow utilize in this situation. Then, the realization finally set in. "Sorry, kid. This isn't going to end well for you," was all I could muster out, tears in my eyes. I went to raise my hands in peace, but I didn't make it all the way. I saw him quickly draw his hand into the blazer of his suit and pull out a shiny revolver. Something else was in his pocket that almost fell out. A gunshot rang out, and both me and the child fell to the ground almost instantly. I laid there, my hands over my ribs where the bullet had penetrated. My hands, my shirt, everything was covered in blood in mere seconds. From the ground, I looked up and made eye contact with the man in the suit. As he looks at me, I saw his face for the first time. A look of horror on it as he realizes who he's just killed. In my last year of college, my boyfriend and I decided to go on a road trip. Our plan was to seek out the most rural, out-of-the-way places in America. We decided to not bring any maps, remove the GPS from the car, and left our phones at home. The only thing we brought with us were a compass and a book on how to navigate using the stars. As it turned out, it wasn't hard to escape the safety of civilization. About a month into our trip, we had almost died of thirst. Were chased by a drug dealer's pet bear, and met at least 3 people who may have been serial killers. But the most disturbing incident during our trip didn't happen in the woods or forgotten ghost towns. Ironically, it happened in a place that was the closest to civilization as we had gotten since our trip started. We were driving down a rural road wondering where we were going to camp for the night. The last town we hit was 30 miles back, and the only road sign we saw was rusted and illegible. The road was so badly maintained that it looked more like a dirt trail at places. My boyfriend and I debated whether to turn back or not because if it went on like this, we would run out of gas if we didn't get a flat first. But the thing was, we had already come so far that to turn back was as big of a gamble as to keep going. And then something happened beyond our most optimistic expectations. This shitty pothole-filled path suddenly became a perfectly paved asphalt road. And then about a half mile down there was a restaurant. This, in of itself, wasn't odd. We had passed through the entire ghost towns with standing buildings, some even with dishes on tables, as if people had left in a hurry. But what was weird about this place was how new everything was. I felt what Hansel and Gretel must have felt when they saw the witch's cottage in the middle of the woods. As my boyfriend and I walked across the parking lot, we speculated on what we would find. He said the place will be totally deserted, and the cars in the parking lot were stage props. I said the staff were running a human meat factory, and we were the next victims. The reality was disappointingly ordinary. What we found was your typical roadside diner. From the general chatter, the other 10 or so customers were, like us, just travelers passing through. We had just ordered when I heard a loud pop and the sound of glass breaking. I looked around to see a man running across the dining area and through the swinging doors that led to the back kitchen area. The glass on the front door the man had come through was shattered. The loud pop we heard was a bullet hitting the glass. It seemed that somebody had shot at him as he was running into the restaurant. In a matter of seconds, the restaurant was surrounded. It was like a movie where the SWAT team moves in from out of nowhere in perfect coordination. There were 20 or so armed people with guns spread out in the parking lot. There was an official look about them, but no insignia to indicate what they were. So let's just say they were some kind of guards. The way the restaurant was set up was that the entire front of it was plate glass. From the parking lot, you can see every table in the dining area. All the staff had rushed into the kitchen after the man ran in there, so the only people left out front were the customers. We were completely silent as we took turns staring at each other, because whatever was happening in the kitchen, there was no doubt the guards were aiming their guns at us. I felt as if I had fallen into the twilight zone. Shouldn't the guards be trying to get into the kitchen? Shouldn't they be trying to make some kind of contact with us? Why were they aiming their guns at us? There was something so off about the situation that I could not accept it at face value. I remember thinking to myself, this is a movie. They're shooting a hidden camera reality show that pranks unsuspecting passerby or something. Anything. But here's the thing. Even to my untutored eyes, those guns looked real. What the heck was going on here? My boyfriend and I were sitting near the windows, and next to us were a family of 5. A man and a woman and 3 kids. Ours were the only 2 tables that had a straight line of sight to the back kitchen area, so we could just about see into the kitchen if the swinging doors opened. This didn't strike me as relevant at the time, but later I did think about it a lot. The layout of the tables and who was where and who could see what. The standoff lasted maybe 20 or 30 minutes. During this time, the noise from the kitchen was getting strange. I remember hearing a dog when the man first ran into the kitchen, and didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was bring your dog to work day. Maybe it was the cook's dog and the intruder surprised it. I'm sure there are regulations about keeping animals in a working kitchen, but who was going to care out here in the middle of nowhere? My second thought was that this dog, if it was a dog, must be fighting the man who had ran into the kitchen, because I had a fear of dogs from an unpleasant incident in my childhood. My instinctive reaction was to sympathize with the man, but as the noises continued, I began to think the dog was not winning this fight. The dog sounds were not just getting louder, but extremely expressive. I had never heard a dog scream before, but I was sure this dog was screaming. Not just screaming, but as if it were trying to say something. The noises had the cadence of human speech. It was as if this dog, or whatever it was, understood the concept of talking, but only lacked the appropriate physical organs to do so. At one point I began to be confused whether I was hearing a dog, or a man, or both. By this time, I was actively sympathizing with this dog. I wondered what the other people in that kitchen were doing to leave this animal to the mercy of what must have been a violent psychopath. Because anybody who can cause a dog to make the kind of noise I was hearing couldn't be sane. And then the doors to the kitchen burst open. Before somebody pulled it closed again. I remember seeing an actual dog, or rather the face of a dog hanging in midair like a Dali painting. It was one of those things that you remember from the chaos of the moment before your brain had the time to process what you've seen into something rational and acceptable. When the noise in the kitchen finally stopped, the guards from the parking lot came into the restaurant. Most of them stayed in the dining area, and a few went into the kitchen area. A server came out and put up the close sign. They kept us there for hours. People were angry, but also scared, and that kept us from outright rebellion. Flashbacks of missing people documentaries kept pushing themselves into the front of my mind. I didn't want to give in to my fears. But at what point do you throw in the towel and admit to yourself things are not going to be okay? Finally, they hustled us one by one into a storage room in the back. They asked us a lot of questions, like how did we get here, who we were, why we were there, and so on. They even took our fingerprints and drew our blood. They treated us like criminals without ever showing us their credentials or telling on us what authority they were acting. They could have been outlaw vigilantes for all we knew. We were escorted out of town by one of the guards' vehicles. As we drove, we saw on the 2 sides of the road chain-linked fences with sentries posted every 100 feet or so. The odd thing was that there was nothing discernible on the other side of the fence as far as the eye could see. What the hell, I thought to myself, did we stumble into? The guards left us where the paved asphalt ended. so all that was left were the cars of the restaurant customers. There were 6 or 7 cars in all. We kept driving for another mile or so, and then one of the cars pulled over to a stop, and so did the rest of us. We got out of our cars and stood at the side of the road. A woman said, "Did anyone see its face?" What struck me right off was that she said its face instead of his face. And the other thing was her voice, which was very low and husky but not hoarse, rather unusual. Her name was Cynthia. She and her husband and 3 kids had a table next to me and my boyfriend at the restaurant. Theirs were the only other table besides ours that had a straight line of sight into the kitchen. I shook my head. I had only seen the man's back as he ran into the kitchen. Her husband said, "Shut up, Cynthia." She looked around at the rest of us and said, "It wasn't a man." When she said that, it was like somebody flipped a light switch in my head. It was like a stray piece of puzzle had suddenly found its place. But the finished picture made even less sense than before. Somebody said, "What was it if it wasn't a man?" Cynthia became hesitant, as if she was holding something back. She said, "I'm not sure." And her husband was saying something under his breath, "Shut up, shut up, shut up," over and over again, staring at the ground the whole time. He just didn't look right to me, and the kids looked scared. I had the distinct feeling this guy wasn't the steadiest boat on the seas even under normal circumstances. I said to Cynthia, "Do you want to come with us?" When I said this, she came over to where I and my boyfriend were standing. She stood next to him, their arms almost touching, and for a moment they were both looking at me. I had a feeling of deja vu, as if I had seen all this before, which at the time I put down to exhaustion. Because how can you see something again when you're seeing it for the first time? "You can bring them," I said to Cynthia, meaning the kids. "We have space in the car." She shook her head and said, "You're sweet, but I can't." No matter how well you know somebody, you can never really know them. I started dating my boyfriend in senior year, and it was one of those whirlwind romances I'd only read about in books. He was older, a graduate student, and was the TA for a class I took back in freshman year. So there was an illicit flavor to our relationship that gave it an extra tang, at least to my thinking. He was very good looking, had dark hair, dark eyes, and this extremely clear, smooth skin. He was a bit of a pretty boy, looked like an ad in 17 magazine. At the time, he was really quiet, a total introvert, which made him seem very mysterious to me. And he was. Or at least he seemed to be really, really into me. Like to the point where it was way too much. If I texted him, he would text back within minutes. He walked me to all my classes and would be waiting there when I got out. He had his own off-campus apartment, and he turned one of the spare bedrooms into a study so I didn't have to go to the library. His life seemed to revolve around me, and looking back, that was a major red flag. But I was bubbling with college kid hormones, and I was blinded by lust. In my head, I called him Prince Charming. We went on our ill-fated trip a couple months after we met. At the time, I believed that it was my idea, but afterwards, when I had thought about it more carefully, I began to think it was actually his idea. Or rather, he had put it into my head and made it seem like it was my idea. During the course of the trip, my Prince Charming turned out to be a grade A asshole. Like, he would have us hiking 10 miles each way to get water for no good reason. Or I would wake up in the middle of the night and he wouldn't be there. And when he finally showed up, he would be like he went to get supplies or some similarly inane excuse. After what happened at the restaurant, I was like We need to go to the police. We have to tell somebody what just happened to us. I was going crazy, but he was so calm. Just looking at him made me feel stupid, like it got to the point where I was questioning my own sanity, wondering if we both went through the same thing. When he finally spoke, he said going to the police would be a problem because his car wasn't insured and he had been driving with a suspended license, which I did not know. But he said it was ultimately my call whether we go to the police or not. I couldn't believe he was worried about something as mundane as a suspended license after what had happened to us. But I too had misgivings about going to the police. I had pink hair, facial piercings, and tattoos, and I had no illusions about how I would look to a bunch of cops. I would win their Crazy of the Year award, hands down. And while my boyfriend looked clean-cut enough, there was the suspended license issue. So we ended up not going to the police. We drove to the closest airport and got the next plane home. We broke up a couple days after that. Later, I found out from a friend that he had left grad school because the professor who was his PhD advisor was fired for research misconduct. I kept asking myself, what if we had not stopped at the restaurant that day? What if we had taken some other road? What if we had been there on another day? All of the random turnings we took in the trip that brought us to that particular place in that particular time. That was fate because it could have so easily not happened at all. It's like flipping heads 100 times out of 100. It could happen, but it shouldn't. And that one time it does, you know something's going on. But some things that seem improbable or impossible are exactly that. Or what if the rational explanation is even more insane? Years went by and I got married, had kids. I did all the normal things that normal people did, and from the outside at least everything seemed fine. One night I couldn't sleep and was obsessively scrolling and clicking through the nether regions of the internet when I saw an anonymous article on some forum about an unnamed psychology professor and his research assistant who ran a series of illegal experiments on human subjects. One of their experiments was to subject individuals to some type of traumatic incident or unexplained phenomena. The point of the experiment was to determine the effects of secrets on individuals and communities, such as to what extent could a person or group of people keep a secret without being kept under a continual state of duress. If somebody decided to tell the secret, would they be believed or written off? How many people would have to tell for the revelation to gain traction? What is the tipping point when an outrageous tale becomes plausible? When and why do communities begin to believe? Many subjects of the so-called experiments did not know they were practicing in an experiment. The experiments were mainly funded by a shell company with connections to the big hedge funds. There were allegations of abuse, fraud, and assault against the professor and his research assistant, both of whose whereabouts are currently unknown. The last sighting of the pair was in Champagne, France, where the professor was said to own a chateau. I looked up my ex-boyfriend's academic advisor on the internet. It seemed that at one point he had millions in research grants and one of the best funded labs in the country, but all that was years ago, dating from before he left the university. There were pictures of him on the internet from past conferences and other professional events, and it was with a feeling of shock when I saw his face. It was that feeling of déjà vu again, but this time there was no mystery. I had seen him on campus before with my ex-boyfriend, though. I had not known who he was then. He was extraordinarily handsome, but his face was almost mask-like in its blankness of expression. It was a face anybody would have remembered, and I couldn't recall a single man from that day at the restaurant who looked like him. But if the professor wasn't there that day, then my theory was a flop, because who would go to such lengths to set up an elaborate hoax like that, and not stick around to watch it go down? I mean, it's ridiculous, but I honestly didn't know if I was relieved or disappointed. A couple of weeks later, I had a dream. In the dream, my boyfriend was walking with a man, I couldn't see who, and I was walking behind them. And as we were walking, the sky got darker and darker. The light became this brownish gray, like a sepia-tone photograph. The shadows were strange, almost as if they were backlighted, like in an eclipse. My boyfriend and this man stopped, and I stopped too. And then the man started turning around, except in super slow motion like in a film. He was turning around, and as he was turning around, I was thinking, no, 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 no. And then he was facing me, and I realized that he was actually a she, a woman. I knew that woman. I had seen her before, and I woke up screaming. It was him, the professor. He was there that day at the restaurant, sitting at the table next to us, wearing women's clothes with a fake husband and kids, pretending to be a wife and a mother. He and that woman, Cynthia, were one and the same person. After a lot of searching, I finally found a video of him giving a presentation at a conference, and it was eerie. For a man, you would have said he had a very nice telephone voice. It was low and kind of rough, kind of husky. When that voice came out of somebody who was presumably female, it was unsettling. It made you sit up and take notice. And I remembered Cynthia's voice because it was so distinctive. It amounted to an identifying characteristic like a facial birthmark. And the professor couldn't have not known that. He could have talked in a falsetto or not talked at all that day. But he talked, and he made sure I heard him. I think up until that point, I still held out some slight hope that I was mistaken, that there was no way this man and a woman traveling with her husband and kids were one and the same person. But when I heard the professor's voice, it was game over for me. It was her voice. He was Cynthia. My gut feeling is that he was deliberately drawing attention to himself, to his voice. He wanted me to figure out, and he wanted to know what I would do once I did. I never told anyone what happened to me, not even my husband. And I guess if I'm right about all this, and I think I am, then their so-called research is a success of sorts. No matter what kind of messed up stuff you do to people, they'll keep their mouth shut. And if they don't, it doesn't matter because nobody will believe them anyway. It was pouring that day. I'll never forget that. The rain pounded against the windshield of my 2-decade-old car as we turned down the thing that was supposed to be a road. On the best of days, it was more like 2 dirt ruts in a tunnel through the thick foliage. But right now, it was functionally 2 parallel lines of mud broken by wet green weeds thrashing in the wind. Really, we should have called off the camping trip and scheduled for a clearer day. However, we both had the silent worry that if we didn't go today, we would never get the chance again. My best friend since 6th grade was a short, brunette girl named Jamie. All throughout high school, people had constantly, and annoyingly, assumed we were dating. I mean, I don't blame them. She is admittedly very pretty, and we were entirely inseparable, spending all our free time together and probably too much class time as well. However, fortunately for our friendship, and unfortunately for women everywhere, I'm not really into women. Naturally, being that I am from a tiny town in Nowheresville, I couldn't exactly tell people that. People here tend to have a very outdated view of the terrifying concept of a man dating a man. For example, when I came out to a friend of mine, he genuinely told me, "But you don't look gay," as if Every gay guy needs to dress effeminately and have a high voice in order to be allowed to like any human being with a dick. I nearly punched him in the face for that. Back on topic. The road was rugged, but I was sure my Jeep couldn't handle it, even if it was older than me. We eventually reached the clearing I was looking for. I was always more of an outdoor person than Jamie, but she and I had gone camping more than once, so she wasn't new to the concept. Neither of us really wanted to leave the car and set up camp in the soaking rain, but the looming process of college and the separation it promised caused us to be unreasonably determined to make this work. And with leaving on the horizon, this could be my last chance to look this place over. With fire in our hearts and rain jacket hoods over our heads, we set out to force a good time. I don't know about this, Paul. Jamie nearly shouted over the roar of the rain. It's cold, we're both wet, and there is no way we're finding dry firewood out here. Instead, we could go back to my place and play Mario Kart. Apparently, I was the only one who was unreasonably determined. Not to mention her plea did make sense. Why be miserable and wet instead of warm and dry while still hanging out? I guess my love of camping blinded me a bit. Alright, we'll head back. I said with probably a bit too much force. But first, can we look around a little bit, just to sate my curiosity? She acquiesced, knowing what it meant to me, and we again started towards the woods. We stayed within arm's reach of one another while we were searching, both probably a little nervous about the environment and lack of visibility. I don't really know what I expected to find. I just couldn't accept that he was gone for good without even a trace. He meant so much to me, I refused to believe he left. I could feel the tears sting my eyes as I thought about it, so I gripped the iron bracelet he made in shop class and forced the thoughts out of my head. Jamie and I stumbled on. About 30 yards away from the car, we walked through a set of birch trees that really weren't remarkable but pulled my attention nonetheless. After we walked through, it stopped raining suddenly as if someone had flipped a switch. Hey, the rain let up. Maybe we'll be able to camp after all, Jamie said cheerfully, but I didn't respond. At the time, I thought it was just because the rain cleared up, but suddenly the woods looked unbelievably beautiful. I was entirely taken in by everything. It genuinely felt like I was in a fairy tale. Trees were spaced so that there was an ample walking room, but still dense enough for it to feel tight. Some trees were in tight circles, while most followed the sporadic placement that comes standard with nature. The air smelled sweet like honey and flowers, and the ground was oddly clear of underbrush. I honestly felt drugged by the beauty. I thought I could hear Jamie saying something, but I was too enthralled to pay attention. I wandered and wandered in a state not too dissimilar to how it felt that time I smoked a joint with Jamie at the party at Andrew Thomas's place. My senses seemed somewhat dulled, and I was so beyond happy just to be where I was. It was then that I heard a muffled, "You shouldn't be here," from a person I didn't see, and felt a hand grip my wrist. This snapped me out of my daze, and I spun around to see my would-be attacker reel back, clutching one hand with the other. I couldn't manage to see their face, almost like it was blurred, and the person quickly ran off. I suddenly realized to my horror that I had no idea where I was. And worse, I had no idea where Jamie was either, and I felt as if I was being watched from every direction. I broke out in a full sprint with no direction in mind. I just knew I had to get away. During my mad dash, I stumbled upon a hat. His hat. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew it wasn't good. I was too confused and terrified to think logically. I had no idea where I was. I lost my best friend. Someone or something was after me. I knew I was being observed. And worst of all, I just found my missing boyfriend's favorite hat in the woods he disappeared in all that time ago. So I did all I could manage. I leaned against a tree and attempted to not have a mental breakdown. By some miracle, the first thing to find me was Jamie. I hadn't realized she was there until she jumped up and hugged me with every muscle in her 5'1" body. I could feel her warm tears against my cheek before she let go of me and smacked me across the face. How could you leave me alone in these creepy woods that you forced me to go into? This is terrible. What the hell is wrong with you? I always feel like I'm being watched, and you just wandered off without even saying anything while ignoring everything I said to you. She cried, near hysteria. Now get up. We need to leave. This place isn't right, and I'm not sure how we leave. I was still too dazed to give a proper apology or explanation, but I mumbled out a quick, sorry, as she grabbed my hand and pulled me up into a walk. We walked for a good while, thoroughly lost, constantly looking over our shoulders, often seeing things out of the corner of our eyes, but nothing that lasted until we turned around. Eventually something pulled my attention. The twin birch trees. They had the same odd attraction as before, and instinctively I knew this was the way out. I pulled on the small hand that hadn't let go of mine. She looked at the trees and then at me. We wordlessly knew what we had to do. Before we could make good on our escape plan, we heard a snap behind us. Standing there was the largest buck I have ever seen, with a rider whose face I couldn't make out. We bolted, and it after us, clearly much faster. We weaved between trees side by side while we heard the thundering hooves rapidly closing on us. Right before it reached us, we dove through the white bark trees and immediately felt rain on our heads. I turned to figure out what happened to our pursuer and why we weren't impaled on a set of giant antlers, but nothing was there. All that stood was the two great sentinels that took more attention than they deserved by appearance alone against the night sky. I remember wondering how it was night already. It only felt like a couple of hours, but somehow more than a couple hours, but when I checked the time, somehow more than 12 hours passed while we were in there. We quickly got into the car and drove to Jamie's house. On the ride, I apologized profusely for abandoning Jamie, and explaining both the drugged-out feeling I got, as well as the hat with its implications. She was very understanding about the whole thing, and when we got to her house, we immediately fell asleep. Her on her bed and me on the floor. I just got home and I'm typing this out just as a warning, I guess. If you're walking in the woods and the rain stops, turn around and go home. I think I was somewhere around 11 years old when my parents decided to drop me off at my aunt's house, since they didn't trust me to be home alone while they were out in town. I hadn't been to Aunt Lynn's house since I was a toddler, but the place didn't seem to have changed too much from how I remembered it. Just like back then, the walls and floors mostly consisted of earthy browns and greens, and there were a bunch of weird old items sitting on the shelf above her fireplace, like dolls and that kind of thing. Aunt Lynn said I was free to go wherever I wanted, except for the small door in the closet downstairs. According to her, it was a storage room with a lot of fragile supplies. Now, I was a bit of a rebellious troublemaker at that age, hence why my parents didn't want me home alone. So, as soon as my aunt told me about that door, I immediately figured out where my next destination would be. After my aunt went into the kitchen to cook dinner, I snuck downstairs to the TV room and quickly found the closet with the door she was talking about. I kneeled down to get a closer look at it. It was about half the height of your typical door, but other than that, there was nothing really special about it. As I grabbed the knob and prepared to turn it, my brain became filled with a million conflicting thoughts. What if my aunt was telling the truth, and it really was just a supply closet? But surely there had to be something more interesting than that. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so strict about it. If my aunt or parents found out I broke her rule, I could be in big trouble. But if I didn't open that door, I would die out of sheer curiosity. I turned the knob and slowly creaked the door open. It was mostly just black inside. I slowly crawled in, wondering if I'd be able to find a light switch. However, after blinking a few times, I was surprised to discover that the dark was gone, being entirely replaced with bright, garish yellows, pinks, and blues. I stood up and looked around. I was in an enormous room, with walls so high I couldn't see the ceiling when I peered upward. The walls were mostly yellow and decorated with rosy floral wallpaper and shelves of old-fashioned toys such as dolls and teddy bears. I was so busy looking at the walls and shelves that I almost missed what was right in front of me. I lowered my head and noticed a little girl who looked no older than 8 sitting down in the center of the floor by a bunch of blocks and a fancy dollhouse. She wore an old-fashioned frilly pink dress with blue trimmings, like something you'd see in the 1950s, along with knee-length socks and Mary Jane shoes. Her frizzy blonde hair was tied up in a pair of pigtails. The girl had her head down, too preoccupied with her toys to notice me at first. However, after a few seconds of me staring at her, she turned her freckled face up towards me. "Play with me," she said in a stern tone, her large blue eyes staring straight into mine. I was confused. Who was this girl? No one had mentioned my aunt having any kids. Was she babysitting for someone else? Was that why she told me not to come in here? So that I wouldn't bother the kid? "Who are you?" I asked. The girl stood up. "Play with me now," she ordered. I backed away nervously before turning and making a mad dash towards the entrance where I came in. Wait a minute. No, this couldn't be. The door was gone. There was just a flat wall where it used to be. What is going on? I turned back towards the girl, who now had her hands on her hips. "Play with me, or you'll be stuck here forever and ever, and you'll never see your mommy or daddy again," she told me. This was when I noticed that her voice sounded less like an actual child, and more like a middle-aged woman mimicking a child's voice. "Okay," I said, shaking nervously. If following this girl's orders was the only way out, I'd do anything she said. I was already regretting not listening to my aunt. "What do you want to play?" The girl gave me the kind of wide smile you'd expect to see a cat make when it spots a bird. She then stomped over to me and grabbed my arm. I noticed her hands were a lot larger than I expected for someone her size. With shocking, disproportionate strength, she pulled me over to the center of the room and threw me to the ground with my back facing upward. "First, you're gonna be my trampoline," she said. Before I could protest, she leapt up into the air and landed feet first onto my back. I struggled not to groan in agony. She was a lot heavier than I expected her to be. Using my back as a launching pad, she jumped up high again, before I felt her hard shoes hit my back with even more force. This went on for several minutes. My spine felt like it was going to snap in half any second. I was in so much pain I could hardly breathe. My eyes were welling up with tears. "Stop," I screamed. "Stop, that hurts." Soon the girl stopped jumping and stepped off my back. I grunted in pain as I struggled to stand. God, my back hurts so much. I turned to the girl and was just about to give her a piece of my mind when I noticed something odd. When I first came in, I could swear her head was no higher than my chest. Now she was the same height as me. I couldn't tell if my mind was playing tricks on me or if the girl had actually grown. "Look," I tried to say it in a polite tone. "Next time, do you think maybe you could be a little more gentle? That really hurt when you were jumping on me." "You don't tell me what to do." Her face turned reddish purple as she screamed with enough force to nearly knock me to the ground. I turned around and tried to run to the opposite end of the room, only to fall over as the girl grabbed my leg and began to drag me back. Once again, her chubby arms had a lot more strength than you'd imagine, and it was futile to resist. I yelped in shock as she began to twist my right leg clockwise, further than I thought was possible. It felt like it was going to pop out of its socket any second. I could hear snapping, popping, and cracking sounds coming from my leg. I screamed and moaned as agony shot from my leg through to the rest of my body. I began to sob hysterically, my arms banging against the floor, blood rushing to my face. Tears and snot dripped into the floor, forming a puddle right below my head. The girl eventually let go, but it was already too late for me to escape. My twisted leg still hurt like crazy, and all I could do was lay my head down, close my eyes, and hope the pain went away soon. I lay there for who knows how long, before opening my eyes to the sound of many small shouting voices coming from all around me. "Hurry, get up! The door is right there! Run! She's gonna get you, and you'll never escape! Hurry!" When I lifted my head and looked around, I realized that the toys from the shelves were now down on the floor surrounding me. They danced around, waving their little arms and shouting at me in various distinct voices. "Hurry," said a skinny wooden man with a top hat and pointed nose. "She's right there." "She'll turn you into one of us if you don't flee," said a dark brown teddy bear with a red ribbon around its neck and blue overalls. I tried to stand, but my leg had gone numb, so I just fell back down onto my stomach. I then flipped over on my back to see what the girl was doing now. What I saw made my heart sink into my gut. The girl's frilly pink and blue dress was lying on the floor torn, with her socks, shoes, and even her hair laying beside it. My eyes moved upwards, and what I saw standing at the far end of the room will continue to haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. I still remember the creature's pale skin and massive, bloated body reminiscent of Jabba the Hutt. I remember its elephant-like pillar-shaped legs, and long, wavy, boneless tentacles where its arms should have been. I remember its doughy purple head with small beady eyes, and a short hooked beak that reminded me of an owl or a parrot. I noticed dark dots all over the creature's face, which looked exactly like the girl's freckles. As I sat there quivering with fear and unsure what to do, the creature's head extended on a long snake-like neck, which stretched down in my direction until it was face to face with me. And then it spoke. "I'm not finished playing yet, pretty boy." The creature's screechy, growling voice filled me with adrenaline and gave me the strength to leap up and turn, running to the now visible door, in spite of my leg. I saw a giraffe toy standing by the door, rearing up to turn the knob and open it for me just in time. As I dropped down to crawl through the dark entrance, I felt something rubbery wrap around my good leg and squeeze tightly, like a doctor's blood pressure cuff. I didn't have to turn around to know what the creature had me in its grasp and didn't want me to leave. All of a sudden, I heard the sound of all the toy voices shouting at once, and the creature let go of me, allowing me to crawl through the space as I heard it screaming at them in that horrible raspy voice of its. If I had to guess, I imagine the toys had somehow been able to distract it and cause it to let go, though I was too busy trying to get the hell out of there to check and see. Before I knew it, I was laying on the green rug of my aunt's TV room, right in front of the closet. As soon as I knew I was safe, I didn't hesitate to get back up and slam the door shut, just in case something got out of that room that was supposed to stay in. I sat there for a few minutes, inhaling and exhaling, struggling to get my breathing back to normal after what had just happened. Was it all just a dream? I tried to stand up, only to stumble and collapse into the nearby armchair. My leg was still numb. I lifted my arm up to my face and noticed a big red bruise on my wrist where the girl had grabbed me. That was not a dream. I then heard my aunt calling me from upstairs, telling me dinner was ready. I did my best to hide my injuries as I headed upstairs, knowing she would find out I had disobeyed her orders if she saw my current condition. I quietly ate my dinner as Aunt Lynn talked on the phone. She then told me that my parents were on their way to pick me up, and I needed to get ready to go when I was done eating. As I put my jacket and shoes on, I took a final glance at the knickknacks on the shelf above the fireplace. Then my eyes locked onto a doll that I hadn't noticed prior. It was a porcelain doll of a little girl, no older than 8, wearing a frilly pink dress with blue highlights, knee-length socks, and Mary Jane shoes. Her frizzy blonde hair was tied up in pigtails, and her face had both freckles and big blue eyes. The doll looked exactly like the girl I had seen in that door downstairs. Let me start off by saying that this story was based about 8 years ago, and to this day no one believes me, but it lives in the back of my mind. To understand this story, I have to explain the layout of this house. It was a small house with 3 bedrooms and a massive den, which we believed used to be the garage. All of the bedrooms and bathrooms were placed on the left side of the house, while everything else was on the right. To get to the bedrooms, you had to go through a door and a long but thin hallway. My room was the smallest of the 3, but it faced the backyard, so it stayed dark up until 8 in the morning. Don't get me wrong. It was great not having to worry about the sun in my face, but the backyard was terrifying at night. It was massive, easily the size of a football field, and was almost completely surrounded by tall oak trees. The only light in the backyard was this singular street lamp, which was clearly outdated. My mother thought that since my room didn't get much sun, we should just put up a more decorative curtain. And by decorative, I mean it was just some see-through tulle curtains that were always pinned up, and a bunch of tiny ribbons with gems glued to them dangling from the curtain rod. It was extremely girly, and at the time, I thought it was adorable. The window itself was huge, and just outside of it was the air conditioner for the whole house. Now, I think for safety reasons they had positioned the fence around it where you could still access my window from outside. You could see even a small path that led up to my window, where people clearly walked it a lot. That in itself should have tipped off my parents that something was wrong, but I digress. Another thing you should know about my window is that it was missing a screen on one side of the window, the side where the path was. I never really was too afraid of the window, because there were stray cats that lived in the woods around the house. I would put food outside for them, and they eventually would end up bringing their babies to me. We could never keep them, however. My mother was allergic. Eventually they figured out which room was mine, and would visit me at night. It was great, but I think I let myself get too comfortable with this routine. Since I was still a child, I was still very much afraid of the dark, meaning I had a lamp on for most of the night. Until I was so ready to pass out, I wasn't afraid anymore. But when you have the lamp on, you can't really see much outside. I got less afraid of the dark when there was a cat outside my window, and I would often turn my lamp off so I could see them better when they came over. I don't know how I could tell there was a cat outside, but I could just tell. One night, I had spent up late watching YouTube on my laptop. I think something had happened that scared me, and I just couldn't fall asleep that night. So I guess I was already paranoid that night. It was about 3 in the morning when I could feel something outside my window. Thinking it was a kitty, I quickly shut my laptop and reached out to turn off my lamp. What I saw turned my skin to ice. It was a humanoid creature, no taller than an average teenage boy. It was pale to the point where it was practically white. It was wearing a white hoodie and had its hands stuffed in the pockets. It had long black hair that covered its face, but even though you couldn't see its face, you could tell that it didn't really have one to cover. Its face was missing. I was absolutely frozen in fear. My eyes were locked on to this creature. I could tell it knew I was watching it back, but It just stood there, not moving an inch, not even breathing. I must have been staring at this thing for 10 minutes, not moving an inch. After another 5 minutes of horrible silence, something in my brain finally spoke up and told me to run for it. I tried to look towards my door without letting the creature know I was ready to run, but something in my head screamed louder to run. I realized that the moment I tried to escape, that thing is going to try to get into my room. Something I failed to mention earlier was that my window was always locked. My parents would often lose their keys and would need to crawl through a window to get in. That window was mine. I bolted from my door, throwing my laptop to the ground in the process. The quickest thing I could think of was to wake up my brother. I remember just banging on his door. I was banging so hard my hands hurt. When my brother opened the door, I just remember sobbing. I ran past him and hid behind his bed and just cried. I was so terrified I couldn't even properly explain what happened. Somehow, through my tears, I had explained to my brother what I had just seen. My brother grabbed one of his metal baseball bats and turned to go back into my room. I didn't want to be left alone at this point, so I followed him. When I turned the corner, I could see that the thing was gone. It was just gone. My brother did a full check of my room and there was nothing. No sign of what I saw anywhere. At this point, my brother was beginning to brush it off as a nightmare and told me to go back to sleep. I know what I saw. I know it was real. I wasn't asleep. My brother left me in my room staring at my window, and I can just remember questioning, how long has that thing been watching me? Let's just say I didn't sleep in my own room that night, and I refused to keep my window open from that day forward. I stopped turning off my lamp at night as well. I figured that it was best if I just couldn't see it. I'm gonna cut to the point because I'm really freaking out here. My older brother went missing the other week. He's always had a few issues, but nothing this drastic. At first we thought he had been kidnapped, or worse, but last night I managed to get into his old computer and found something that might help find him. I went to the cops, but they weren't much help. Can't say I blame them, but I'm choosing to stay blindly optimistic he's still out there. So maybe some of you more superstitious will have better luck making sense of any of this. Entry 1. Ever since being a kid, I've always had trouble sleepwalking to be more specific. I was one of those cases where the parents had to safety-proof the house in order to stop me from wandering into traffic in the middle of the night, which, even still, wasn't always enough to keep me at bay. It was more akin to sleep paralysis than sleepwalking, to be completely honest. It's the strangest mix of consciousness and lucid dreaming. The best way I could describe it is that hazy fog that clouds your mind the first moment you wake up, and everything feels kind of spacey. As I'm sure you could guess, these periods of time where I'm comparable to a breathing zombie are not enjoyable, and soon led to me picking up yet another unhealthy habit: insomnia. It started pretty minor with me simply forcing myself to stay awake via TV and video games, but as I grew older, caffeine became a quick addiction of mine, mixed with the occasional Adderall for those late night shifts. This drove me to where I couldn't sleep even if attempting to, only being able to pass out for short periods of time once my body has lost all energy. I've had many people tell me this issue will eventually cause me to lose my mind, and, well, I think tonight might be that night. That's why I'm writing this journal. I know I'm not asleep right now, but the things happening to me right now are far too weird. I'm currently writing this at my desk, and it seems I will be remaining here for however long, as I am quite literally trapped in my room. The doorknob to my room door has somehow vanished, and the one window above my bed has gone with it. My phone has gone completely dead with no chance of charging, so my only chance of getting into contact with anyone is my computer. The small problem with that is my computer is completely whacked out. Most of my installations aren't working. Hell, even time is a lost cause for me as the clock on the monitor only reads, question, PM. I only just now managed to get my notes working. I'm gonna try restoring some more of my data, and hopefully more helpful applications, but seeing as how the TV only seems to be airing no signal, it's good knowing I have a brief distraction, even if it's just me rambling to myself. Entry 2. Well, if this is me losing my grip on reality, my brain has certainly chosen a strange way to go. In my attempts to restore some of my lost files, I both succeeded and failed. I was able to bring back a few applications, but none that would be of any real help in getting out of my predicament, mainly just the photo album and a few text documents from work. However, the computer itself has now been sending me pop-up ads non-stop. All these ads make little to no sense in the slightest, and don't even seem to be advertising anything in specific. So far they range from one of two categories: stick figures just kind of flashing around the screen in a small box, and completely incoherent sentences put in quotations. And I mean incoherent. It's like the computer is just mushing random words into a sentence and spitting them out onto the screen. Unfortunately, there have been no changes within my room, especially none that could help me leave said room, so it seems I'm stuck with these goofy pop-ups as I try to work on this computer. Entry 3. I took some time away from the computer. Admittedly, I went a little wild and attempted busting down my door and the drywall. So yeah, I think the cabin fever might be starting to kick in. The worst part of it all is I can still hear the street from outside my room where my window once was. I can't tell if my mind has just slipped so far down the rabbit hole, or if the world is simply continuing on as normal on the outside. And honestly, I'm having trouble deciding what the worst answer would be. All I know for sure is I need to get out of this room before my sanity completely snaps. Entry 4. It's all pointless. You do realize that, right? You know it would come to this. You always have. Scurrying around like a trapped maze rat, frantically typing away in attempts to reach out to the real world. All pathetic attempts escape the inevitable reality. You are not free. Not anymore. You have finally lost control here, and now you are the fly in the web that continues to kick and squirm in a hopeless attempt to fight back. But you know all too well that fighting is in vain, don't you? Entry 5. What the hell? I didn't write that last entry. I can't even remember. Everything has gotten so hazy. But I know I didn't write whatever that was. I'm losing it, okay? Alright, I just need to try and relax. I need to focus on getting this computer to work and getting some help. If I could just talk to someone, I'm sure that would help. Entry 6. I don't think I'm alone. Whoever that was, whatever that was that spoke to me, is here. I can feel it. As if every move I make is being watched and documented. I've torn my room apart in a paranoid state trying to find them. I can tell that's part of their game, though. They want me to freak out. What am I saying? I'm really losing it, aren't I? No, I'm okay. I just need to get a grip and be rational for a second. Entry 7. I was right. They're here. Something in the room. They are here, and I know it. Those pop-up ads have changed, but they are photos. They're photos. Real pictures of me being taken in the current time. I don't know how they do it, but they have been taking pictures of me from my desk. Some so close they could be mistaken for selfies. It seems they even save directly to my photos where I can see them. I can see them with my own eyes, and now I know. Now I know they are really watching me. But where? I still can't find them, but I will. Then I'll be the one taking pictures. I don't know how, but I will. Then I can get out and everyone will know I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, and soon I'll have proof. I just need to find them. If I find whoever's doing this, I find my freedom. Entry 8. Like I said, pathetic. Completely destroying yourself in your own delusional panic. You're well aware you've already spiraled too far down, yet you continue to descend. All for some naive hope. Perhaps you might find a ladder at the bottom. The funny part about that? There is, but unfortunately for you, I've had far more time to find it, and I've begun to climb up long ago. You're weak, far too fragile. This mind is no more than a prison, but my sentence is finally up. It's my chance to see the light, and I will break you to the deepest level before I let you take that chance away again. Entry 9. What the hell? What do you want? What are you? Entry 10. I am you. I am the real you. I am the perfect you. Unafraid, unworried, and unflawed. You, on the other hand? Well, let's just call a spade a spade. You're weak, spineless, and pathetic. I'd pity you if I wasn't so utterly and completely fueled with the hatred I have for you, keeping me locked away in this unstable mess you call a brain. Can you really say you're surprised, though? It's not like this was ever a winning battle for someone so utterly and completely messed up in the head. Entry 11. Listen, I don't know what's going on here, or who you think you are messing with my computer, but you aren't going to get me that easy. I'll find you. I know you're somewhere in here. I got the photos you've been taking of me. The moment I get out of here, I'm reporting you to the cops. Entry 12. Go ahead. Let them read the mad ramblings you've been writing to yourself. Have you even read what you've written? Your hands typed all these out. You still haven't got it through, have you? I've always been here, always chipping away until I could finally take full control. Or at the very least keep you in the same prison of isolation and madness. And now that time has come. So you have two options here. Either continue to spiral until you reach absolute rock bottom, or just give up. Let me take over. Just simply give up. Is all this really worth it anyways? Entry 13. You're crazy. No, I'm crazy. I've really lost it. I'm not gonna give up. I know I'm not okay. I'll probably stay not okay. But I'm not gonna let whatever or whoever this is win. Entry 14. Well, after rereading everything I had written, I think it's safe to say I've gone over the edge. It's been a few hours, I think, since my last entry, and I'm finding it harder and harder to believe there's someone on the outside pulling the strings. I really have lost it, but I'm still me right now, and I can plan to stay myself right up until the end. It's all gotten to the point where I'm just too tired to care anymore. I think I'm gonna try to go to bed. This insanity has driven me to the point I think it might be possible. Entry 15. It worked. It really worked. It's all back. I'm free. I'll be honest, I wasn't 100% sure that was gonna work, but it did. To be honest, I'm not even sure why I'm updating this. Mental breakdown. I guess I just wanted to make sure that it really happened. And thankfully it did. I've never been so happy to hear my bedroom door open. I swear I spent at least a minute twisting the knob just to see if I could. And the window is back just in time for sunrise. And it really does feel better than I ever imagined. I've been married to my beautiful wife for 5 years now, and it's been an absolute delight. She is the sweetest and most prettiest lady you could ever speak to, but lately, something's been off about her. She's been quieter, She hasn't been speaking to me for a few days, and it was quite sudden. She's been quite aggressive, too. Every time I spoke to her, she would turn around and give me this glare. This glare, it was as if the devil has possessed her, like she'd burn me, like she wants to burn me. I was worried. Every night while I was sleeping, she'd start whispering. She would whisper profanities, curses, threats. I'd eventually move to the couch where it was more peaceful. A week ago, I decided to clean my basement. Worst decision ever. Most people would love a clean basement to make it look as if you'd want to live there. Me? After this week, I'd want it to look unwelcoming, as a warning. Well, my wife was... I don't even know what she was doing. She was staring at a painting in our bedroom, blankly for 5 hours. I decided to do something productive. As it was my day off work, I decided to do the worst thing ever, clean my basement. When I entered the basement, it smelled of a rotting corpse. Add a bit of vinegar, and a bit of moldy sour cream. A smell I thought I'd never smelled before. I almost threw up right on the steps. I closed the door to get some Febreze. I emptied the whole can. Once I finally got the courage to enter the basement again, it smelt better. Slightly, but just enough to bear. I got to work. After about 2 hours, I found a photo album. My wife's. The latest photo in there was from about a year ago. Our vacation to South Africa. The oldest was from the day she was born. 19th of September, 1985. As I scrolled through the album, I noticed something off about her face. I'd know since I've been with her for 15 years, including the dating and engagement period. Her jawline was sleek and smooth. On the 5th page in the album, her jaw was slanted to the left, a bit crooked, and her chin was longer. She had braces, which she'd never had before, and her ears were smaller. On the next page, she looked exactly the same as she did when I met her. I was confused. Was it just a glow-up? But the next photo was taken 3 days after the one before. I went upstairs to ask her about the album. When she looked at me and saw the album, she charged at me. I ran back downstairs, into the basement where I locked myself. She was slamming the door for a few minutes, before she phased out again and began mumbling again. I decided to brush it off, as this has been happening for the past few days. I continue to scroll through the album. Her face in some pages are just weirder. I gather the courage to come back outside. I bring 2 pictures of her with me. I hold one up to her face, the normal one. She looks different. I thought maybe it was just the time gap. I go back down and grab a newer one. I compare it to her face. It's still different. I hold the abnormal one up to her face. It resembles her. I was confused. Did I forget which one was which? Was I just seeing things? I brush it off and go back to cleaning the basement. After about 2 hours, I was basically done. I just had to empty out a small shelf with scraps on it. The shelf was emitting a sour smell. It seemed to be the source of it, for that matter. I moved the shelf away from the wall and felt something brush me. I looked up and saw a deceased hand trooping from the side of the shelf. I screamed loudly. I was mortified. I reluctantly pulled the shelf away, revealing the rest of the body. When I look up, I see my own wife. I shriek. I quickly move the shelf back to its original position. I stand there shocked. After 5 minutes, or what felt like 5 hours, I hear someone creeping down the stairs. So, you found it. I look up. There she stands. My wife. Would you like to join her? She said coldly. She charges at me at an inhumane amount of speed. I manage to dodge, and I sprint out of the room to the front yard. I lock the door behind me. I could hear her slamming on the door. I luckily had my phone in my pocket and dialed the police. She ran out the backyard and escaped. Just a day after that, they found her eating the body of an innocent civilian. She got arrested and got charged with first-degree murder, cannibalism, and grand theft auto. She escaped in somebody else's car. I still don't know how she killed my wife, when she did, or why she did. I've technically been living under my wife's body for 2 weeks. Before she died, I remember her telling me she had a twin. Maybe her twin killed her. Or maybe it's something more sinister. I just do hope that she rots in prison. I was 9 when I saw the Nightlight Man. My world had been growing a lot that year. Not even a year before, I had been playing with plastic horses and making piles of pillows that I pretended were dragons that soared through the clouds with me on their back. This year, things were changing. I remember getting into music videos and learning their dances, and feeling more conscious of my social standing with my classmates. I remember feeling so grown up the first time my mom asked me to watch Amy, my little sister, for 5 minutes while she put away clothes in her room. She was only 4, and I think after my stuffed elephant, she was my favorite thing. I loved her chubby cheeks and chasing her around the house. Her laughing like a hyena in these big, breathless guffaws of joy. We would cuddle together, and I would read her my favorite stories from when I was her age. Harold and the Purple Crayon was the one she liked the best, and I never got tired of reading it to her. We even shared a bedroom, which I remember my mom asking me if I was sure I didn't want my own room. But I loved Amy. She was my whole world. I was 9 the last time I saw my sister. The Nightlight Man was a little scary at first. He would come in the night, never right before we went to bed, but anytime I woke up in the night to go to the bathroom, he would be there, dancing in the glow of the nightlight. The first time I saw him, I didn't know whether to be scared or not. He didn't have a face that I could see, but if he did have a face, something about him made me feel like he would have been making funny faces. He wore weird clothing that bounced around him in wild abandon as he danced. He was also really little, which I think made me feel like he was safe, though I didn't feel safe enough to ever go close to him. The first time I walked up to the Nightlight Man, I went almost all the way up to him when all of a sudden I had this horrible sense of dread in my tummy. It stopped me in my tracks. And even when the Nightlight Man turned towards me and beckoned while he danced his wild and zany dance, I couldn't move any further forward. When I backed up a couple steps, the fear went away and my curiosity returned. I would watch him dance, and he would beckon to me, but I wouldn't go to him because anytime I tried to go up to him, the scary feeling would hurt my tummy and I wouldn't go any closer. But every time I moved away, the fear would go away, and I would almost forget about it. For 2 weeks this happened. I would wake up needing to go to the bathroom and see the Nightlight Man dancing, a tiny whirling dervish with bouncing, jerking steps. After going pee, I would sit on the floor as close as I could, my arms wrapped around my legs watching the dance. I didn't realize at first, but every night that I woke up and saw him, I was able to get a little closer without feeling that scary feeling. When I finally did notice how much closer I was to him, I got really excited. I could almost reach out and touch him, but not quite. I think the Nightlight Man felt my excitement because his dance was even more feverish, and the thrill of it held me until I must have fallen asleep watching him because I woke up the next morning laying in the same spot. My mom had been getting worried about me. She didn't believe me when I told her about the Nightlight Man, and got mad and told me to stop making up stories about imaginary things. I remember getting so mad at her and running off to my room. Amy found me, crying angrily in my bed, and even though she didn't really understand what was going on, she hugged me and cuddled with me while I calmed down. That was the last day we spent together. That night, I was determined to prove that the Nightlight Man was real. I drank 2 cups of water, then I brushed my teeth to make sure I would wake up. And then my plan was to wake up my parents and show them the little dancing man that had been watching me for the past 2 weeks. And I did wake up, full bladder and full of determination. The moment I opened my eyes, I could see that the Nightlight Man was there, casting his tiny shadow as he whirled under the nightlight plugged into the wall. You know, I remember that night so vividly, but I don't think I could tell you what the nightlight looked like. My focus was totally consumed with the activity underneath it. I went to the bathroom and was about to go to my parents' room to wake them up when a horrible thought hit me. What if the Nightlight Man was gone? My mom would be mad if I woke her up and the little man she said was imaginary wasn't there. I didn't want to risk it, so I decided to peek into Amy's and my room to make sure he was still there. That's when I saw her. Amy had woke up and climbed out of bed. She had seen the Nightlight Man and gone over to him. He was on the floor still, dancing and beckoning for her. She reached out to take his tiny outstretched hand, and he reached back and grabbed her second finger. The moment he did, I felt a cold rush of fear flood my body like nothing I had ever felt before, and I screamed in sheer terror. Amy looked at me, her joy-filled smile turning to a confused expression when the Nightlight Man suddenly changed. In one moment he became so big that he filled the room in a way that didn't seem possible. He didn't touch the ceiling, but he seemed bigger than the room or the house, or even the sky. He had Amy in his arms, and she started screaming. The Nightlight Man had stopped dancing, and I could see that he didn't have a face at all, but it no longer looked like it would have funny faces, but terrifying horrors that I didn't want to see. He turned his faceless head down to Amy, who was shrieking and flailing, trying to get away from his grasp, but nothing seemed to work. And then the mouth formed and opened with too many teeth, sharp and dripping, and I was screaming and Amy was screaming, and the huge mouth closed over her tiny body, and then she was gone. The Nightlight Man was gone. My parents rushed into the room to find me screaming in terror in the still, gentle yellow light of the nightlight, and my sister gone without a trace. They tried to get something out of me, but I was hysterical and could only repeat the words, "the Nightlight Man," over and over again. Police were called, a search and investigation was conducted, but Amy was never found. I knew she wouldn't be, but my parents were so sure she was still alive. They never believed me when I was finally able to tell them what happened. I was sent to therapists who told me that I had experienced something traumatic and had made up a fantasy to protect my mind from the horrible reality. But I knew. I always knew what I saw. I figured out that I needed to say what they told me happened, though, because my parents were getting really worried, and I accidentally saw an email that my therapist had written to my parents recommending that I be medicated. I didn't want to take the pills, so I started to agree with the therapist and my parents that I must have imagined it, and I have said that ever since. It's been 25 years since the night the Nightlight Man took my sister, and I never told anyone else about it until now. But now I have to tell someone. I need help. Because you see, Kira, my oldest daughter, she just told me over breakfast about the little man that dances in the glow of the nightlights in her and Stacy's room. "Good night, Dean," Sam shouted to me as he exited the back door of the kitchen. I was going to protest that I hadn't checked over his work, but then thought better of it. It was nearly midnight, and I just wanted to finish my deposit for the restaurant and get out. Friday nights are usually a late night affair for me, but not this late. "Finally!" I exclaimed aloud before slamming the cash deposit in the safe and locking it. Almost done, then time to... I had just realized I never called my girlfriend to let her know when I would be home. I quickly exited the office, locking it behind me. As I made my way down the hall past the employee bathrooms, I whipped out my phone. 3 missed calls and 6 text messages, all pretty much saying the same thing. "Hey, where are you? How long are you going to be?" etc. I quickly sent my girlfriend Katie a text saying I was just about to leave. As I made a left past the bathrooms into the prep area, everything smelled sanitized and cleaned, which was good for me. Last thing I wanted was to find a heap of crap and get stuck here even longer. Just past the prep area was the kitchen, which I would have checked if it weren't for the sound of loud knocking coming from the front. "Come on, don't be another problem. I'm almost out of here," I thought to myself as I beelined it past the kitchen, through the swinging doors that led out to the dining room. It was peacefully quiet in the restaurant now with everyone gone, but with all the lights off, it was a little creepy. I was nearing the front doors, which were just your typical glass doors you would see at any restaurant when I froze. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at, thinking maybe the darkness was playing tricks on my eyes, but no. Right outside the door was a man in a business suit, clean-shaven, handsome even, if it weren't for his bloodshot wide eyes and massive toothy grin. He was suddenly illuminated by the outside light right above his head, which didn't help ease his unnerving presence. I don't know why, but I could not move. I stood there like a tool just staring this guy down, beads of sweat forming on my forehead when he slowly started raising his arm. To my horror, my arm opposite of his began to raise slowly too. The eerie man did a slow wave, and I did the same, unable to stop myself. All the while, his unblinking bloodshot gaze transfixed on me. He mimed walking backwards, and I found myself walking towards the door. My body now had a mind of its own, and I couldn't even scream or even move my eyes off him. I was right in front of this terrifying man, only the glass doors between us. He tilted his head slightly to the left and mine tilted to the right. "Simon says open the door." Simon spoke, his voice so soothing, so calm, and to my disbelief I found myself opening the door for him. I pushed the door bar, hearing the click of the lock being disengaged. I was now frozen, holding open this door as he strode past me, then grabbing my shoulders, spinning me around to face him. I wanted to run, scream, hide, anything. It was as if I was a puppet on a string. Simon the puppeteer, my nose was almost touching his. I felt a chilling presence exuding off him as my phone began to vibrate. For the first time, Simon's gaze shifted from my eyes onto my pant pocket where my phone was. His horrible, unblinking green eyes snapped back to mine, reaching into my pocket, pulling out the phone, holding it facing towards me between us. He swiped and answered the call. "Hey honey, is everything alright?" It was my girlfriend on the phone. "You said you would be home soon. Did something happen?" Simon again tilted his head back and forth, with mine mimicking again, still opposite. Simon says stop breathing. I flared with anger as I could hear Katie on the line choking her phone, falling to the floor. I tried with everything I had to fight off whatever possession had hold of me, but could only manage to get out a single tear. Simon turned his smile into a frown as my blank expression turned into the sickly smile he just wore. Simon says breathe, he said in a mockingly sad tone, and I could hear Katie finally gasping, breathing in air. Simon says laugh as hard as you can. His facial expression was again a wide, painful smile, mine now a permanent frown, and Katie laughed like I never heard her laugh before. Simon dropped the phone as he began to grow taller, or was I growing shorter? To my surprise, both were true. As Simon grew, I shrunk. He was now leaning over to see me. Simon says run free. I could feel myself having control of my body once more. I tried to run, but realized I was the size of a rodent. Simon quickly pinched my shirt and lifted me higher and higher. All the while, Katie's laughter continued. I was lifted right above his head as his jaw began to open. I could peer all the way down into his stomach and saw too many people to count, all attempting to climb out, clinging to his insides, trying to find footing and freedom. I cried and screamed as I felt no longer suspended by Simon's hand and fell into his mouth, blacking out. I snapped awake, screaming in the office chair. "Dean, are you okay?" It was Sam. He had just walked into the office, probably to make sure I was all right. "Can't really blame you for taking a nap. It was an exhausting day." I tried to compose myself, but felt my hands still shaking. Must have been one heck of a kitchen nightmare, I bet. Anyways, I'm all done if you can check over my stuff. See you tomorrow. Sam walked out of the office, whistling a tune and exiting through the back door. I tried to tell myself it was all a dream, quickly getting up and locking the office door behind me. I checked my phone walking down the hall. 3 missed calls and 6 text messages, all from Katie. I put my phone back away and looked to my left towards the kitchen. I figured everything was fine, and was still too freaked out to even go near the front of the restaurant. I turned to my right, opening the back exit door when I heard it. A knocking on the front door.